"I'll remember this, David," he said. We waited and listened. We heard voices and the metal sound of swords, then silence. I wanted the fight to begin. The waiting was making me nervous. Then suddenly it started. There was the sound of feet and people shouting. I heard Alan shout and someone cry out because he was hurt. I looked over and saw Alan killing Mr. Schwann with his sword. "Watch your window," he shouted. I looked and saw 5 men running towards the other door. They were trying to break it down. I shot at them with my gun and hit one of them. The others looked confused. I shot at them again over their heads and then a third time. The men ran away. Somebody pulled Mr. Schwann's body out of the room. Then Alan and I were left alone. "It's not over yet," he said. "They'll be back." I reloaded my 3 guns. Then we listened and waited again. We heard a sound, and a group of men ran at the door. At the same time, the glass of the window broke, and a man came through it. I pushed the gun in his back, but I was too scared to shoot. He turned around and put his hands around my neck. My courage came back. I shot him. A second man was coming in through the window. I shot him in the leg and he fell on top of the other man. I stood looking at them, but then I heard Alan shout for help. I turned and saw him fighting with a man. Many more men were coming in through the door with their swords in the air. "We're dead," I thought. But Alan ran at them all with his sword. With every step, a man fell. Suddenly they were all gone and Alan was running after them. He came back, but the men continued running away. In the room there were 3 dead men on the floor, and another man lay dying near the door. Alan and I stood together. "We've won," he said calmly. I sat down. It was hard to breathe. I thought about the 2 men I killed. Suddenly, I started to cry like a child. "You're tired, David? I'll watch and you can sleep," he said. "You've done well." I slept for 3 hours. Then it was Alan's turn to sleep. I knew that there was nobody sailing the ship. It was moving gently with the wind. I heard the sound of the birds, and I knew we must be near land. I looked out of the window and saw the hills of the Isle of Skye on the right, and behind us, the Isle of Rome. Alan and I ate breakfast at about 6 o'clock in the morning. I did not feel very hungry. The floor was still covered in broken glass and a lot of blood. But in other ways our situation was good. All the food and drink was in our room. Mr. Riak and the captain were in the other room further along the ship. Alan cut one of the silver buttons from his coat and gave it to me as a gift. "My father gave them to me," he said. "Take one to remind you of last night. Anywhere you go and show that button, my friends will help you." Not long after, Mr. Riak and the captain came to talk to us. They looked very tired. "You've destroyed my ship," said the captain. "There aren't any men to sail it. We'll have to go back to Glasgow. But this coast is very dangerous for ships. You've killed the only man who knew how to sail it." "I've often sailed up and down this coast," said Alan. "I'll still give you 60 coins if you take me to Loch Linnhe." The captain agreed to this. They also agreed to exchange some brandy for 2 buckets of water. The captain and Mr. Ryack were happy, and we cleaned up our room. When we hit Alan's boat, we were sailing through the Little Minch. At dawn, after the fight, we were near the Isle of Canna. The quickest way to Loch Linnhe was through the Sound of Mull. But the captain had no map of this part of the sea, and he was afraid of damaging his ship in this small channel of water. So we decided to sail down the west coast of Mull, around the south and up into the loch. This was a very pleasant time on the Covenant. The sun was shining, the wind was good, and the mountains on the islands were very beautiful. Alan and I listened to each other's stories during this time. But when I spoke about my friend Mr. Campbell, Alan said that he hated everyone with the name of Campbell. "But he is a good man," I said. "Why do you hate all Campbells?" I asked him. Alan told me that the Campbells had killed people from his family, the Stuarts. They then took their land from them, too. Alan then had to join the English army to make some money. I was very surprised at this, because Alan's Scottish family history was so important to him. "But then I deserted," he said. "And now, if the Redcoats find me, they'll kill me." "So you're a Jacobite and a deserter from the English army? Why are you back in Scotland?" "Surely it's too dangerous," I asked. "I miss my friends and my country," he replied. "But I also take money from the people in Scotland to their chief, Ardshiel. Ardshiel now lives in France, but he wants to return to Scotland. He wants to win back his land for his followers. Ardshiel's half-brother, James, gets the money from the people, and I take it to Ardshiel in France." "So the Highlanders pay twice to use their land?" I asked. "Once to King George of England and once to Ardshiel." "That's right," said Alan. "When the Highlanders lost to the English at Culloden, Ardshiel had to run away and hide. The English took away all his power and his land. They also took away the weapons from the Highlanders. A Campbell called the Red Fox works for King George. He gives the king the rent from Ardshiel's land. But the people still love their chief and continue to give him money. The English can't stop that. But when the Red Fox heard about the money they were paying to Ardshiel, he became angry." "And then what happened?" I asked. "Well, David," he said, "the Red Fox wants Ardshiel to die. So he made all the Stuarts leave their homes. Now, I'll find the Red Fox and kill him." Alan was very angry now. So I decided to talk about something different. "How did you escape the Redcoats? They are all over Scotland." "It's easier than you think," he said. "If you know the countryside well like I do, you can hide from the soldiers, and there are always friends to help you." It was late at night, but because it was summer, it was still quite light. The captain came in, looking very worried. He wanted Alan to sail the ship. We went outside and looked at the sea. On one side of the ship we saw something that looked like a fountain. "What's that?" asked the captain. Alan told him it was the sea hitting some rocks. Then we saw more fountains. There were rocks under the water everywhere. It was very dangerous to sail the ship without a map to show us where the rocks were. Alan thought that there were fewer rocks closer to the land. For a while we sailed close to the Isle of Mull, and we were safe. But as we came around the coast of Mull, the wind stopped and the waves pushed the ship towards the coast. The next minute, the ship hit the rocks with a loud crunch. We all fell down on the deck. The waves grew bigger and the ship was thrown onto the rocks again and again. Some of the men were trying to put a small boat into the sea. It was very difficult because the sea was so rough. Waves kept breaking over us and the ship was sinking. Suddenly one of the men cried out, a huge wave hit the Covenant, and we were all thrown into the sea. My head went under the water and I started to sink. I came up, but immediately I was pulled down again. I cannot remember how many times I sank and came up. The waves and the wind were very strong, and it was difficult to breathe. After a while, I found a piece of wood. I held on to it until I was in calm water. I looked around me and saw some land, not too far away. By now I was very cold. I knew I must swim to the land or die. It was very hard, but after an hour one was finally on land. I lay on the beach in the moonlight. I was tired but alive. There was nothing on the land, no houses, no lights, just land. I was tired but happy to be alive. I did not know if any of the others survived. When morning came, I climbed to the top of a hill and looked out at the sea. There was nothing on the sea, no ship, not even the smaller boat. I looked around me and I saw that I was on a small island. Nobody lived there. It was separated from the mainland by the sea, and there was no way of getting there. Completely alone, I thought. I had nothing except a little money and Alan's silver button. I did not know much about the sea and how to survive. But I was hungry, cold, thirsty, and tired. I needed to find food. I ate shellfish from the rocks. It sometimes made me ill, but it was food. I was starting to lose hope when one day I saw a small boat with two fishermen. I shouted and waved to them, but they sailed on, saying something in Gaelic and laughing. I lay down on the ground and cried. Going to die on this island, I thought. But the next day, the sun was shining, the shellfish did not make me ill, and I began to hope again. I climbed onto a rock and looked out to sea. There was the same small boat coming towards the island. I ran down to the beach. Help! Please stop, I shouted. As the boat came closer, I saw that it was the same two fishermen as before, but with another man. The boat stopped and the man started shouting to me and waving. One only understood one or two words. I heard the word tide. Suddenly, I understood. Do you mean that when the tide is low? I did not finish my sentence. Yes, yes, shouted the man. Tide. I turned and ran to the other side of the island. I heard them laughing behind me. I saw that when the tide was low, the island was attached to the mainland. It was only an island when the tide was high. I've been here all this time when I can walk to the mainland twice a day. When I arrived on the mainland, one asked an old man for information about Alan and the other men. You must be the boy with the silver button, he said. Yes, I am, I replied, surprised. Well then, he said, You must go to Torsay and take the boat from there to meet your friend in Appin. So, once again, I was traveling through an unknown country. This was the Highlands Allen's country. There were high mountains on either side of me and dark clouds in the sky above. The people looked very poor, but they helped me on my journey. After some days traveling, I arrived in Appin to meet Alan. I saw the red coats of the English soldiers moving across the north coast. I was worried because I knew they were dangerous for Alan. I also knew that Alan was somewhere on that coast, waiting for me. I started to have doubts. Was I doing the right thing? Why was I looking for Alan? He was a dangerous man to be with. Perhaps I should return to the south and leave Alan. As I sat thinking, I heard the sound of men and horses coming through the wood. Soon, 4 men with their horses appeared. The first man had red hair and looked important. I knew immediately that he was the Red Fox. From their clothes, the others looked like a lawyer, an army officer, and a servant. When I saw these men, I made my decision. I must find Alan, I thought. When the Red Fox was close, I asked him the way to Aucharn, a nearby village. "Who are you?" he replied. "And why are you so far from your home country?" He knew from my voice that I was not from this part of Scotland. "I'm an honest supporter of King George of England," I told him. "TM not dangerous." The Red Fox did not believe me. "We'll wait for the soldiers," he said. He turned to look at the lawyer. As he turned, there was the sound of a gunshot from higher up the hill. At the very same time, the Red Fox fell to the ground. "I've been shot," he cried. "I'm dying." The lawyer held the dying man in his arms. The Red Fox looked from the lawyer to his servant. There was fear in his eyes. "Take care of yourselves," he said to them. He sighed. Then his head fell forward. He was dead. The lawyer put him down on the road. This woke me from my shock. The murderer. The murderer, I cried, and began to climb the hill. After a few minutes, I saw the murderer moving away, not far in front of me. He was a big man with a black coat and a large gun. "I can see him," I shouted. The murderer began to run. I looked back down the hill. The soldiers were there now, and the lawyer and the officer were telling me to go back. "No," I shouted. "You come up here." "I'll give you £10 if you catch that boy," shouted the lawyer. "He's working with the murderer. He stopped us and started talking while the murderer killed the Red Fox." I was confused. Things were changing so quickly, I did not know what to think. The soldiers began to climb the hill after me. "Come in here among these trees," said a voice nearby. I did what the voice said and heard gunshots going through the air past the trees. Just inside the trees was Alan Breck. He said nothing except, "Run." He started running across the mountain, and I followed him. After a while, we stopped running. "This is serious," Alan said. "Do as I do for your life." At the same speed, we ran back across the mountain, but a little higher. Finally, we stopped behind some trees. We were breathing quickly. Alan moved first. He went to the edge of the wood and looked around carefully. Then he came back. "Are you all right, David?" he asked. I said nothing and did not even look at him. A man was murdered in front of me, the man that Alan hated. And here was Alan, hiding in the trees, running from the soldiers. Was Alan the murderer? Or did he order someone else to kill the red fox? My only friend in this strange country was guilty of killing another man. I did not want to look at him. I wanted to be on my own, not hiding here with a murderer. "Are you still tired?" asked Alan. "No," I said. "But you and I must go different ways, Alan. I liked you very much, but I don't like the things that you do. They are not my ways and they are not God's ways. I must leave you." Alan thought for a moment. "Do you think that I killed the red fox, David?" he asked me. "Well, I know how much you hated him. If I want to kill a man, I will not do it in my own country," said Alan. "We don't have much time. We have to run away from here. If we're caught, I'll be in trouble because I'm a deserter. And you'll be in trouble because you were involved in the murder of the red fox," he said. "But I'm innocent," I said. "I'm not afraid of the law in my own country." "This is not your country," said Alan. "Listen, David. The dead man is a Campbell. If they catch you, the Campbells will want somebody to die for this murder. And that somebody could be you. This is the Campbell law here." This scared me. You people from the lowlands don't understand. We're in the highlands, David. When I say run, trust me and run. It's difficult to run and hide here, but it's even more difficult to be in a redcoat prison. I'll take my chances with you, Alan, I said. "It'll be hard," warned Alan, "but your only other choice is death." We shook hands. "Now, let's see where the redcoats are now," he said. We started walking. Night came. It was a cloudy night, so it was very dark. Sometimes we walked, sometimes we ran. We traveled on until I was tired and weak. At dawn, we stopped. Alan found a safe place high up between two rocks. I slept. I was woken by Alan's hand over my mouth. "SSS," he said. "You were making too much noise in your sleep." "Well, what's wrong?" I asked. He went to the edge of the rock and called me over. "Look," he said quietly. It was now the middle of the day and very hot. From the rock, we looked down into a valley. A river ran through it. About half a mile up the river were a group of redcoats. I looked around. There were more redcoats everywhere I looked. "I was afraid of this," David said, "Alan. They began to arrive about 2 hours ago, but you were asleep. If they stay down in the valley, we'll be all right, but if they come up here, they'll see us. We'll stay here until it gets dark, and then we'll try to get past them." All that day, we lay in the hot sun. But we had no water, so, finally, Alan decided we had to move. We jumped down from the rock and waited in the shade. The sun also made the soldiers tired. Many were sleeping. We started to leave the rocks. We moved slowly, but by the evening we were some distance away from the redcoats. Later on, we found some fresh water and washed and drank from it. We felt safe and decided to stop and eat. And so we traveled like this for several days, always looking out for redcoats, always moving south. I wanted to get to Edinburgh, and Alan needed to get to France. We became very tired and hungry. We did not speak much because we were so tired. I was getting ill, but I knew we had to keep going. But soon I felt very ill and I could not continue. I had to ask Alan for help. My legs simply could not carry me any further. I had a fever and my stomach hurt. Alan promised to find a house for me to rest. Luckily, the family at the first house we found knew Alan well by name. They saw that I was ill and called a doctor. I was young and strong, and I slowly began to get better. I stayed in bed for only a week. During this time, Alan did not leave me. It was very dangerous for Alan to stay there. The redcoats might see him. But still he came to see me every night and hid in the woods during the day. After a month, we were ready to continue our journey south towards Edinburgh. I was now stronger and felt excited about my return to Edinburgh. The only problem was that we had very little money. We needed to move quickly. We arrived at the River Forth. We then had to decide how to get across it to Edinburgh. There were still a lot of soldiers there to get past. Luckily, Alan found a boat to take us across the water to Queensferry, near Edinburgh. Morning came, and now I had to find Mr. Rancular, the lawyer. I needed to speak to him about my father and my inheritance. I also wanted to tell him about my Uncle Ebenezer's plan to kidnap me on the Covenant and send me to America. Alan was going to wait until sunset to meet with me again. If everything goes well with Mr. Rancular, I can give you the money to help you get to France, I told Alan. Soon I was in Queensferry, looking for Mr. Rancular's house. Only now I began to have doubts. Will I find the house? Will Mr. Rancular believe me? Perhaps he won't want to help me. What will I do then? I walked up and down and finally stopped in front of a very nice house. The door opened and a man came out. Can you tell me which house is Mr. Rancular's? I asked. Well, said the man, it's the house I've just come out of. I am Mr. Rancular. Well, sir, I said, can I speak with you? But I don't know your name or your face, said Mr. Rancular. Who are you? My name is David Balfour, sir, I said. David Balfour, he said, sounding surprised. We went inside the house. How can I help you? He asked. I am the son of Alexander Balfour. Mr. Ebenezer Balfour is my uncle. I believe that the House of Shaws is my inheritance, I said. And so we talked. He told me about events in Edinburgh and all the lies that my uncle told about me. I told him everything that happened to me. When I said Alan's name, he stopped me. It's probably a good idea to call your friend Mr. Thompson. It's for his own safety, he added. Mr. Rancular gave me some clean clothes. Then we talked again. He told me the story of my father and Uncle Ebenezer. The two brothers fell in love with the same woman. After a lot of fighting, the lady rejected both of them. After more arguing, they made a decision. They decided that one brother could have the lady and the other brother could have the house. It was a bad decision for everyone, said Mr. Rancular. Your mother and father lived and died poor. And your Uncle Ebenezer was hated by everyone. He became selfish and dangerous, as you have seen for yourself. And so I asked, what is my position now? Well, the law says that the house is yours, replied the lawyer, but I think your uncle will fight you for it. Listen, your uncle paid Captain Hoseason to kidnap you, right? We need to show that your uncle was responsible. If we can do this, he'll have to give you the house. At this point, I began to think of a plan. I told Mr. Rancular, but do I have to meet your friend, Mr. Thompson? He said. I think so. Sir, I said. He asked me many questions, but I saw that he liked my plan. In the end, he agreed to it. At around sunset, we left the house. We met Alan and walked down to the house of Shaw's. Alan knocked on the door. Mr. Rancular and I hid nearby. My uncle came to the door. Who are you and what do you want? He said. Who I am is not important, said Alan. I have to talk to you about David. Alan told my uncle that he had locked me up in a room. The law says that this is David's house, but I can help you. I know that you have money. You must either pay me to kill David or pay me to keep him away from you. You choose. How much do I have to pay? Asked my uncle. How much did you pay Hoseason? Alan asked. He's my partner, you know, so don't lie to me. Well, I don't care what Hoseason told you, but I gave him 20 pounds. That's the truth. But he was going to sell the boy in America as a slave to get more money for him, said my uncle. Mr. Rancular stepped forward. Thank you, Mr. Thompson, he said. That will do nicely. Mr. Balfour, you have admitted to the kidnapping of your nephew, David Balfour. Shall we go inside? I think we need to discuss a few things. And so finally my uncle had to give me my inheritance, the house of Shaw's. Now it was time for Alan to continue his journey. We both felt very sad. He was a very good friend to me, and we went through so much together. As we walked along, we did not speak. I gave him the few coins I had with me so that he could get something to eat on his journey. He held out his hand. Well, goodbye, he said. Goodbye, I said. I held his hand tightly, let go, and walked away. My adventures with Alan were over and a new life was about to begin.